are linked for a number of reasons, but actually the hardest evidence for me still remains that from an epidemiological point of view, if you have two people, one presenting with language deficit and another one with apraxia, you can tell if they are right-handed that both are likely to have a left hemisphere lesion. Beyond that, the relationship between language and handedness and praxis and sensory motor integration is still pretty much an open question. So I think we all look forward to Manuela's presentations. I'm sure it'll be very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm very honored to be here. Well, I've done different things, so I'm just presenting now 4 experiments I conducted on this topic. So, how do people learn foreign languages nowadays, still nowadays? By listening and listening and listening and filling in gaps. And at the end of the lesson, everybody, is still very attentive. I don't know whether you have collected this kind of experience. You're nodding, why? Okay, so, and how is vocabulary learning? In tedious lists. Why are we instructed to do so? I mean, sleeping during lessons is not what we intend to do. And learning in lists, well, we must do it, but is there a better way to do it? We're told that language is abstract. Why? And words are symbols for objects and events in the real world. Sorry, I have to be in the focus of the camera, sorry. This is, my lecture experience to move around in order to enhance attention. Sorry. So, why are we told that language is abstract and words are symbols for objects and events in the real world? Everything started from Descartes' dichotomy. In his Discours de la Méthode, he said that body and mind are separated from each other. And, well, this tradition has been then put further in the last century, or in our time, by Chomsky, who is incredibly influential in practice of language teaching, language instruction. And his friends, Fodor and Fülöshin, also, Fodor especially, very influential in L2 instruction. They said, well, words are there somewhere as symbols, and, well, by just reading them, that would be enough. Why using the body? And interestingly enough, already a scholar in the 18th century said, if you want to teach a child what a lion is, you will roar, you will make whichever gesture, because at that time there were not always illustrations for these animals, and he writes, it's very interesting, this book actually, for that time, and he writes that just showing by gestures would enrich the representation of the word for the child. And also at that time he points out that gestures could help to learn foreign languages. And also Piaget said that language acquisition is a sensory motor process. So, but all these things didn't have anything to do with language, of course, and not with language instruction. And when I started my, let's call it career, with a step which was not a career because I studied linguistics, and then as a linguist I could not find a job at university in the field. I grew up as a Chomskyan. And in fact, I was not really interested in, going further on that path. And so I looked around. I studied in Salzburg, and at that time, the University of Linz offered a job as an Italian lecturer with a linguistic background. And, well, Italian lecturers, I never gave them. So I went there and said, well, I'm Italian. I can teach my mother tongue, If you want to take me as I am, here I am. And I said, oh yes, come, you know, in those days, but you were laughing, but in those days it was necessary to be a native speaker, and that was it. They also took, you know, an hairdresser coming from Italy because they meant that natural input is the input coming from the native speaker, and that's it. You don't need instruction. I mean, instruction, do children get any instruction to learn their L1? No, they don't. They just have, you know, you might remember about the poverty of stimulus by Chomsky. A child gets a language input which has errors in it, which is not complete, and the child, as language is innate, the language just grows. And this was the idea also for L2 lessons at that time. So I started 91 with no idea what I was doing. And I had a few months where I saw that I did not want to bore my students with listening and comprehension activities only. And when I was trying to explain them texts, and you were not allowed to use the L1 of the students, I was gesticulating, you know, as an Italian, you know, Italians gesticulate. I was gesticulating and said, io e tu, dove? And people were looking at me like this because they were only used the listening comprehension activities. The teacher sitting quietly there and pressing the button for the cassette at those days. You won't ever you would not know what cassettes are, but you know, about enough. So, and one nice day I had this sentence which changed my life, and they said not to understand it, although to me it was so easy. Scusi, dov'è Piazza di Spagna? Excuse me, where is Place of Spain? Which means where are the Spanish Steps in Rome. This was a sentence from a dialogue. And they were looking at me like this, you know, very bored. And I jumped out and I said, Scusi, dove è Piazza di Spagna? And everybody laughed, of course. That I had to consider before, but then it was too late. So, scusi, dove, where? And this is something, for instance, which German speakers of German don't have. The accent, which has a phonemic difference. E means and in Italian, and is, right? So this with the accent, they didn't know. So they, you know, they were just surprised I was going like this. And Piazza di Spagna. So, and everybody laughed. And then they were laughing at me. I said, no, come out of the tables. You intended not to do the same thing. What? Do we have to, you know, yes, you must. And and everybody was laughing and performing the actions and the gestures and, you know. And that changed my life. Because, I noticed that by showing them this, they understood what I meant. And they're making the gestures and moving around help them to memorize the words and the chunks and the sentences much, much better. And, you know, I was not doing any research at all. I was just trying to help them to get to a spoken language with a certain amount of fluency and accuracy. Because in those days they said, well, it's enough to communicate. Yes, but if, in Italian, if you miss every second ending, you say something completely different. And so the native speaker at once does not understand you anymore because you're just making a salad of endings and, you know, verbs and just putting whichever vowel at the end of the word means that you might miss the communicative intention. But in those days they said, well, language is innate, it will come by itself somewhere, somehow, you know. And I was not, I did not agree with that, because if you speak a foreign language, you must be accurate and you must be fluent. Otherwise, for languages like Italian, if you go somewhere and you want to speak Italian and the waiter is waiting for your cappuccino order, you know, and gets nervous, he might switch in another language into English, or for German speakers into German, areas on the Austrian-Italian border. So I decided then to go further on this. I was just interested in knowing why gestures help, because at that time I was a witch. They would have liked to burn me because I was saying things that they did not like at all. Because I was, doing crazy things at lessons, 40, 50 people all going, scusi, dov'è? Piazza di Spagna, and laughing, and jumping sometimes. You had things to go and move around and laugh, and it was, of course, a noise as well. So that was not really mainstream-like, and they, tried to boycott me as well in certain ways, but I was very interested in that, and I saw that students did enhance their fluency and their accuracy by doing that, and also their motivation to study the language, because at once, if you succeed in saying things, you like learning. On the other side, if you always listen and then you're tortured by making sentences, that, of course, works on your motivation. So, I decided to make a PhD with Wolfgang Klimesch. He is a memory expert for oscillations. You might know him from his oscillation work. And he said to me, well, I believe that it works, but you must show it. And I ran an experiment with about 400 persons. They gave no results, and I can say it, because I was using natural languages. I was using Italian first, and then Italian slang, and of course, I asked the people, the participants, have you ever studied Italian? No, and they signed. And so, they should be, clean in order to learn. But what I did not realize at that time, and Klimesch is not an expert for language learning, he did not point to that because he might not have thought about. Well, you learn languages through association. So people in the continent, they all learn Latin, or most of them learn Latin, coming from higher schools, going to university, and my participants were university students, or they learn French. Most of them also learn French, or they had learned Spanish, or they had just been a few times in Italy on holiday. So you pick up things without knowing that you know them. And so I would say wasted about 400 participants on several experiments. Nothing came out. And I was very, very, very annoyed by that, because I saw it, a lesson working, and then in the experiments, nothing came out. So one nice day, I decided to construct a corpus. I said, they can't know. And I constructed it according to phonetics of Italian, so it sounds Italian, but it's not. So nobody can, get into the internet and look for words. He does not remember. And I had, for this experiment, a corpus of 36 words. I had 29 persons, and they learned audiovisually, 18 items, and audiovisually plus adding symbolic gestures. It was a within subject design, and these are the results. And this is a clean experiment. Thanks to this artificial corpus, when I submit a paper, the reviewers always ask, why don't you use a natural language? Because of this, because with natural languages, you always give possibilities to associate. And you cannot really control it. So it's then a matter of other things, but not of the method you use. And these are the results. So here, first time I met the participants, well, the red bars are learning with the gestures, and the blue ones audiovisually. And the first time, immediately after the training, immediately about a quarter of an hour after the training, these were the retention results, 23 something and about 10, right, difference. And on day 8, I had another 4 repetitions, and then testing, 63 something and 31, so twice as much. And then students were, well, participants were not informed that they would be tested anymore. So they were completely naive about the whole thing. And on day 15, I tested them again, 66, 24. So you see, if you learn audiovisually by only reading and hearing, you've got quite a quick decay, and this is what we experience as well. If we learn a list of vocabulary items, it's got, I mean, in my age anyway, but also if you're younger, you have to repeat it and repeat it in order to really keep it in mind. And if you learn an L2, a foreign language, you must have an inventory of words which you use regularly. So you cannot learn and forget, learn and forget. So, day 15, you see 66, 24. After 14 weeks, day 73, look at the decay. 53 towards 8%, more or less. So, and this is quite normal. This is what one does. You know, they had 12 repetitions altogether. And then after 14 months, you see, of course, you forget. If you learn with gestures, you also forget. But 12 to 1.33. Here, they did not want to be tested. And I had to beg them to cooperate because they did not want any more at all. So they thought they would have forgotten about everything, but it was not the case. So I gave, and this was the main experiment of my PhD thesis. My explanation was the connectivity model of semantic processing, which was proposed by Klimesh already 82, and then again 94. So, which was an old model, let's say. And he addresses the issue of the codes in the brain that can be shallow. This we know from cognitive psychology, like auditory information. So if you are learning a word in a foreign language and you only hear it, you might forget it quite easily. And the deep codes, which are complex, when he wrote it, he wrote about visual complex codes and also multimodal information. And by adding the gesture, you make the word as a code much deeper. And deep codes, because of their structure, can retrieve information quicker and decay slower. And redundancy in the system enhances storage and retrieval. So what does Klimesh mean by that? So let's suppose this is a code, and you've got an acoustic component, which is, in terms of networks, a node, and a visual component. So you have a network, let's say, consisting now, in the example, of two nodes which are interconnected. But suppose you add, for instance, Spania, an emotional component. You know, you get a stronger network, and if you add the gesture, you add the motor component, and also another component there. I mean, if you can split the gestures, you will get a huge network. And now suppose that one component of the network decays, for instance, the acoustic component. You can then retrieve it by activating the network. The more nodes it has, the easier, the faster the communication within the network is, and the faster it's retrieved, and so on and so on. I could give you an introduction to that, but because of the time, it's not possible. But this really made sense to me, and in those days I had no idea of the brain. That the gestures enhance memory for verbal information was not new. So, Engelkamp, his professor emeritus in Saarbrücken, Germany, found already in 1980 the so-called enactment effect. This is a seminal experiment, Engelkamp and Krumnacher, 80. 48 actions learned through listening versus performing, and this was the seminal work. They said, well, it works better if you perform the actions. So they were just doing memory research. That had nothing to do with language, because, you know, language and memory are different things in cognitive research. So, and then in another group in the States, Cohen, this is the date of publication, he they found that if the gesture is only observed, the effects are not that good. So it's necessary to that the subject performs the task himself. So they called it SPT, so subject perform task effect. This knowledge never reached education. So that's the way it works. Because memory was never an issue for learning, as language is innate. It will come by itself. So why working on memory for language? His student, Wolfgang Zimmer, who is now professor in Saarbrücken, Engelkamp's, this guy, student, Zimmer, he tested the enactment effect over the years. And he really did a great job because he tested it for different kinds of materials, not only verbs, but phrases, actions with real objects, common and bizarre actions, and more interestingly, in different populations, healthy subjects, mentally impaired, memory impaired, young and elderly, students, children, and so on. And it worked with all these populations. So, and also with different kind of tests. So this is a very nice review, an overview of the whole enactment research, but unfortunately 2001, so there is a whole bunch of papers missing, but it's a very good, it's a book. So, what are the explanations that have been given for this effect of gestures on memory for verbal information? Well, it started by Engelkamp and his student Zimmer with a motor trace. And in those days, they talked about a motor trace, right? If you perform the gesture, you leave in the representation of the word this so-called motor trace. And this motor trace explanation has been given also all over the years, and also in papers I wrote, I report of this motor trace. But also, in fact, I mean, if you do something with your body, there must be somewhere a record of this. And also another explanation, because in those days they excluded them mutually. So there were people talking about the motor trace and other people about the mental imagery and so on. So in those days they thought they should find one reason why gestures enhance verbal learning. So mental imagery. So we all have a mental image of concept. If I go house, I think you can follow that. If I go house as well. If I go swim, you do. If I go to go, do. If I go to go, you also do. So we have a mental image of actions and also of abstraction of actions. And if I go house, I don't think it matches your internal representation of a house, right? I can do it, but it does not match. You say, well, this is not a house. And if I go rabbit, it might match. If I go rabbit, you're thinking, well, not really. A rabbit, well, a rabbit, yes, can raise its foot, but, you know, it's not really a rabbit. And so we do have a mental image, and then we show some results I found on this. Also, other people talked about enhanced attention. And in fact, if you look at me and I go, scusi, dov'è Piazza di Spagna, your attention will be higher than if you just listen to me. And that's obvious. And also complexity of representation. And this is what Klimesh, my PhD supervisor, says. And this also is documented in literature. Of course, I mean, if you've got a more complex representation, you've got a better chance to remember it. So, when I went for my postdoc with Angela Federici in Leipzig, the Max Planck, she said, well, you were talking about a motor phrase. What about if we just learning vocabulary items, we just rub our hands? That would be much better than, you know, going there, scusi, dov'è, Piazza di Spagna, you know, making yourself ridiculous in front of the students, you know. And she is right. you just rub your hands during learning. So you also perform a motor action which can be connected to the word and leave the motor trace, right? Why not? That would be good. I mean, you know, always doing the same things, or having, for instance, a ball in your hand and, you know, doing something, a motor activity, which might enhance. So, and we had 33 participants. I constructed a new corpus, and this was very, very well controlled. It took me 3 months with the help of another linguist in order to really avoid association. Also, you know, with products you can find on the German market, you know, if you buy something which has got a name and you remember that, no, we excluded everything. 3 months. And we use concrete words, and this corpus we call Vime. And we use 2 kinds of gestures. Iconic gestures, for instance, bridge, ruzzanego, 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 right? And semantically unrelated movements in order, you know, to have this motor trace. And the hypothesis was that also these kind of gestures would help as well as these. And what are the results? No. Iconic gestures helped significantly better. So these are the results. The yellow bars are the iconic gestures, and you see it goes up, and then here, of course, if you repeat and repeat and repeat all the days, also the semantically unrelated gestures somewhere, you know, will help. But I think in the short and in the middle term is a good tool to make. I mean, it's a good way to enhance memory, or to have a better memory if you perform the iconic gestures. And more interestingly, you see the decay again, like in my PhD work. After 60 days, you see if you don't have the iconic gestures, with other gestures, you have got the decay. So, what does the brain imaging say? After training, after a whole week of training, we left them consolidate over the weekend, and on the Monday thereafter, we imaged them with a word recognition task in the scanner. And they were just asked to press the button if they would not recognize the distractor. So they were just lying quietly. And the contrast, silence minus iconic gestures, produced this pattern of activity. And you find everything they had experienced. So, I mean, and what I was interested in particularly was activity in the motor cortices, because I was looking for that, right? So, and yeah, one more.
Sorry, Manuela.
Yeah.
So the task was to hear word
and read it.
And read it.
Yeah, only that.
Just read it. So it was auditory presented and visually presented.
Exactly.
And the 2 were presented very short after one the other.
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
you could
randomly.
hear one, and you could see the correspective, or you couldn't. It was a different word.
Oh yes, no. You had, well, they had the words they had studied, either with the iconic gestures or with the semantically unrelated gestures, and we had distractors, and the distractors were randomly thrown into the corpus. So if they recognized the distractor, they had to press the button, and otherwise just listen. So in order to keep the attention, we had these distractors intermixed with the stimuli. So, words learned with symbolic gestures activated, and this is the contrast: symbolic gestures versus meaningless actions or gestures. Actions, let's call them actions. So, we found a difference in the premotor cortices. So 4 words learned with iconic gestures. with a larger blob on the left side. Our participants were all right-handed, so this is also documented in literature. And that you activate this, the premotor cortex during recognition had already been shown in previous research, Valese, Reyes, but many others before me. So that was quite correspondent with other research, not in second language learning, but already in the combination of language and movement and gestures. What about a closer look at the thing? I ran a ROI analysis because I wanted to see whether the semantically unrelated movements also leave a trace. And in fact, so if you see the blue line are the meaningless gestures, you see, in fact, when they hear the word they have learned with the semantically unrelated gesture, in fact, they also have activity in the premotor cortices. But if they hear the word they've learned with the iconic gesture, the yellow line, they have a significantly more activity. I've been asked what I think of this, and I guess that the iconic gesture is just a more complex sequence of movements. So whereas the semantically unrelated is just this, or this, or this, or this, right? It's quite simple. In order to illustrate the words with the iconic gesture, they had to perform a sequence of movements. For instance, the word match, right? To light a match was like this. So you use both hands and you have a sequence of movements. And that, I guess, might activate the premotor cortices more in order, to reconstruct this. This is my interpretation. What about the meaningless gestures? What did they activate once participants lying in the scanner read and heard the words? And here, when I pressed the last button, I said, what are the blue dots? I expected something else, but I found a prefrontal network, in fact, with the ACC, with BA10, rostrolateral prefrontal cortex, and I started reading about these areas because they were not canonical to me, to the work I was doing, and in fact, it seems that by, seeing a gesture that does not match with the semantic content of the word activates a network for cognitive control, which you find more or less like this, also in Stroop tasks. So you see, if I go house, you say, oh, okay, what is she doing? No, this is not house, So you detect an error, ACC, and then, as far as I know, because I'm not in these things, but at the time I gave this interpretation, there is this BA10 which suppresses information which does not match. So this was my interpretation of the data. And so it makes sense in my eyes that we react this way. So at the end, there must be a mental image for the word semantics, and this is kind of a proof that if the two don't match, you're in a sense disturbed by the conflict. So okay, that was done. I had also the interest of seeing whether abstract words can also be enhanced by gestures. Because, of course, if you go window, right, you've got this representation also in your mother language, so that you perform the gesture and it's something you do. And if you say table, right, if you do like this for table, it's something you have experienced already, and so on. So concrete words are quite well mapped in an experience-dependent network, as Müller has been now saying since '92. but this is a very good paper on this. And what has been extensively studied are action verbs and concrete verbs. But I had also noticed during my lessons of Italian that people, for instance, for adverbs, there are a few adverbs in Italian which are really, at least for German speakers, are really difficult to memorize. For instance, although, sebbene, already, già. You know, adverbs, because there are function words also in your mother language, and it's difficult to catch them and to keep them in mind for whichever reasons. And I adopted also, you know, gestures for these words. For instance, you will ask, for instance, still, the word still. The word still, ancora, they had to go back like this. And they said, oh, do we have to do it? Yes, ancora, 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 and also made, of course, the joke, you're young and I'm old, and you know, these things. And really it helped. I mean, the joke also. But, you know, this is quite kind of a complex movement. You have, you know, to record and then perform yourself. And, for instance, the word already, già, 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 they remembered. And so these are not semantically related gestures, they are just arbitrary. But I observed that helps, so I used them, you know, without any scientific interest behind that. I just wanted to help people to come to an active capacity of speaking the language. So I had ran another experiment that time together with Thomas Knöpfsche in Leipzig at the Max Planck. And my question was, does enactment enhance memory also for abstract words? And I said yes. Which category of words benefits more of enactment? And I predicted nouns are better recalled than verbs, and verbs better than adverbs. Does enactment favor transfer effect for own sentence production? Because that I had observed during my teaching years, that if they had learned through gestures, they could also speak much faster. And, you know, I didn't know anything about that, just observed it. And my prediction was that in new sentences, subjects use more items that have been enacted than items that have not been enacted audiovisually. And I had 20 German-speaking participants, and this time, this has been the only experiment around with sentences, because I had 2 research assistants who really could help me to run such an horrible experiment, because participants were trained 5 days, and it was such a hard time for them, because they had to stay for hours there and stand. So, you know, and learning a language which you're told it's somewhere in the world, but you don't know which language, does not particularly motivate you. And so, 32 sentences containing each 4 items: noun, verb, adverb, and noun. So this noun was concrete, and I'm going to give you examples, and the other 3 components of the sentence were not, were abstract. Altogether, 118 items, controlled very well for length, frequency, of course, familiarity in German, and and we had all kinds of tests: free recall, match free recall, and so on. I'll show them to you now. So they learned half of the sentences audiovisually. The clerk administrates basically the property. I think in English that will be better here. In stage, the property, basically, you would say, the adverb at the end, right? In German, you would not. And I did not bother about positions, because I just wanted to see the memory effect. So the sentences were constructed according to German syntax. So, Botul fettoze igro denaro. That could be Italian, but it's not. So this is a typical Italian open syllable, and So also the length, you see 3 syllables for the concrete subject and 3 syllables for the abstract object, and 2 syllables for the verb and for the adverb. So half of the sentences, they saw me as a static picture. The other half of the sentences, they saw me performing a gesture. For instance, this sentence, the driver ignores presently the warning. The driver ignores presently the warning. So, results. Free recall. The free recall, which means you're given a piece of paper and you write all the words you can remember. First in German, and in Vimy, and it was alternated daily. So the yellow bars are the words with gestures, and the blue ones are audiovisually encoded words. And you see already everywhere significant, and it grows and grows, and the relationship is most of the times the same. Of course, towards the end, the significance becomes less, but it's a matter of fact, if you repeat and repeat hundreds of times, you will learn everything. Everybody will learn everything. So, Vimy, the artificial language, you see, it takes 2 days to sort out the cows, and then it swaps, and you've got then a clear effect on the gestures, on memory, and you see, and it gets up and up. Here it's. But of course, Vimy, you must get used to this structure and you remember, of course, less than in your mother language. So free recall. But these are 2 memory tests. So what does help me if I know the words, for instance, in the foreign language, but I don't know the translation of them, so I cannot use them. More interesting is the matched free recall. So participants were asked to write both languages, and if the words were right, we use them for statistics. So you see, day 1, day 2, cows, and then day 3, it swaps also here, the same as before, and and you got always better performance for words learned with gestures. Cued recall, translation from one language to the other, German into Vimy, again the same picture, and Vimy into German, again here, starting from the 3rd day, and this I've observed in other studies as well. In the beginning you've got cows, and then you need to sort out, and then once you are tuned into the structure or the sequence of phonemes and so on, then you get better. That was what interested me really in this study. Item analysis. So, concrete nouns, verbs, adverbs, abstract nouns. And you see, again, everywhere significantly better kept in mind where words they had encoded with the gestures. And of course, concrete nouns must be better because they have already an action component, also in the mother language. And a concrete noun has got to do more with your body because you do the things with it or you interact in a way. Sentence production, also this really interested me, and participants were taught to produce novel sentences, not to reproduce the canonical sentences they had learned during training. Nevertheless, they did. They produced also canonical sentences. On day 4, day 5, and day 6, we tested them, not on day 1 because they would not have had enough to produce sentences. And day 4, you see, the results are stable. So if they reproduce canonical sentences, they always have more words, not significantly different, but anyway, more words. They have better retention with the gestures. But you see, there is no enhancement over the days, right? Whereas if they produce novel sentences, you see, in the beginning, well, not significant, but then it grows more and more significant. So that means that if you use the gestures to learn, you will produce by using more the words you have encoded through the gestures. And this also was something which was already documented in the old literature by Engelkamp in Saarbrücken, at the Saarbrücken school. They talked about the pop-out effect And this also I observed during lessons. Once I went, people went Spagna. Once I went, they said right? So, and if you ask participants to say the words and you make them read the word in their mother language and then you say, what is the translation? It takes much longer. Whereas this immediate effect of the gesture pops out in the very moment you see the gesture. And that might be probably an evidence for better retrieval, faster retrieval, better retrieval, I guess. Item analysis in sentence production, of course. Everywhere they used more items they had enacted, everywhere, which is also, look at the adverbs, what I told you, ancora, già, and so on. This is it, you see, 34.4 to 22.1. The difference is quite striking. So, new question. These are works on retrieval. But what about encoding? The very first moment you see Miss Macedonia doing these funny things, what happens in your brain? Because, that might be also very interesting. And there is a paper by Steyroth and Pulvermüller which inspired me. And they say that encoding novel words with different modalities leads to the immediate formation of experience-related word networks in the cortex. That was interesting to me when I read the paper because I thought the experience-related network is there once you train participants for a whole week, but not during coding. I thought it was just, be something, I thought that would be very, very difficult to grasp. And I ran an experiment. There is only one scanner in Austria, in Graz, for scientific research. All other scanners are medical. And so I worked together with Claudia Repetto, she's in Milan, and we had 1 hour of vocabulary training in the scanner with 32 native German speakers, and the task was try to memorize as many items as you can in the scanner. 30 words altogether, only 3 repetitions, 10 words visually encoded, just reading them, 10 words audiovisually, read and listen to the words, and 10 words read, listen and watch the gesture. And then behavioral assessment. So, what are the bold responses upon stimulus presentation? So, if they read the words, we have visual areas, we've got semantic areas, but we also have some motor areas. Contrast silence versus visual. Read and listen, so read minus listen, auditory cortex. Sensory motor minus audiovisual. We have again the motor cortices. I was interested in that. If they might have simulated what they see, right? So this is in line with a lot of research, and these results are quite intriguing to me. So if you are imprinted with gestures when learning, you then construct the networks we see during retrieval. And the behavioral testing was not that good, but if you have only seen and read and learned the words for only 3 times, it's obvious that 3 times these words that sound very funny. And we have a free German test, write as many German words as you can immediately after the test, after the training in the scanner. And this is significant. So sensory motor, audiovisual and visual are not different from each other. And also after about 60 days, you see there, and this is nearly significant. But I mean, with only 3 repetitions, it's a little bit, it's a little stimulation. So, but here it's interesting. So, wrapping it up, gestures as a tool to enhance foreign language learning. Who said that? First empirical study, Queen Allen's, she tested it on English speakers with French expressions. I wrote a paper in German, 96, when I was considered a witch, and nobody took any notice of it. This is my doctoral dissertation with Vimy words, 2003, and they all said you're mad, but you're a PhD now, a mad PhD. Tillier, French researcher, she worked with with English nouns for French children. Kelly is American at Colgate, professor at Colgate University in the States. Japanese actions, verbs with university students. This study, I presented this one as well. Now, other studies are coming out, English-speaking children in French lessons. This study I cannot present today, but also we have similar results. Also, if the trainer is not a human, but a virtual teacher, an agent, it helps. And this is a study we've run at the Max Planck now, which is under revision, and also it shows the same effects. Not reporting success are Krönke and Rowe. If you are interested in reviews, there is one which I wrote 2012, but also one which is now under revision in Frontiers in Educational Psychology, which should come out in the next few weeks. So this is a focused review. I would recommend you to read this if you're only interested superficially. And this is a much longer paper. So, words and the body. What do both things tell to us? Words are experience-dependent functional networks, said by Pulvermüller, Kiefer and Pulvermüller, very interesting paper, this one. And if you learn the word in your mother language, mela, Italian, you bite the apple, you smell it, you spit it, you make it fall, and whatever. If you only read the word and you connect it with a sequence of letters in your mother tongue, you might have a less extended network. And what do gestures do then? Concepts are grounded in sensory and motor brain systems that are flexible and experience dependent. And thus, I think that actions strengthen the connections to embodied features of the word in and one. So if you go andare, you might strengthen the connections to your mother languages, which might be different now. I cannot say English. If you make an iconic illustrative gesture, like casa, Spagna, and so on, you might match an internal kinetic image of the word, which you have previously created in your native language, and therefore connected the novel word in the foreign language to an embodied representation. And symbolic gestures can construct an embodied representation from scratch. So, già for already, ancora for still, and so on. So, gestures, in my opinion, for what I've done until now, can serve as a powerful tool. I talk about tool during encoding to enhance memorability and word use during sentence production. And now, last slide, last question, because I know that you're interested in clinical applications. Are there any application in clinical settings? For instance, aphasia rehabilitation. One of the researchers I admire most, Pulvermüller, has a theory which goes against all what I've been saying, and he has also been saying. And he proposes the constraint-induced aphasia therapy that does not use gestures. And however, you know that aphasics gesticulate a lot. And there is also accumulating evidence that gestures can serve as a tool for rehabilitation and aphasia therapy, and there are already lots of works on that. But they are in different, in disparate areas, and there are studies with 2 or 3 patients, because there is a difference in the lesion and the difference in the remission and in all these things. So it makes the whole use of gestures quite complicated, because every patient is different. So what's next? Thank you for your attention. I hope I've been told 1 hour and a half. I was told enough. It's also written in the.
That's okay.
1 hour.
Just perfect.
Okay.
So,
Done.
any questions?
Yes.
I'd just like to throw up the reverse. I'm a neurorehabilitation person, but from the motor point of view, and the importance of using language to enhance motor functions. Exactly the opposite way around.
Right.
I think it's critically important. But there's very little research on it. Empirically, physios use language.
Yeah. So raise your hand. Here.
As they're walking, say.
Right. So you would mean now raise your arm.
Exactly. And actually say it as you
say it. Say as you do it.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But to then enhance. But presumably we're talking about the same networks.
Well, I think the 2 gesture and language, or action and language, are 2 sides of the same coin. I'm not me saying that. There are lots of people saying it. And I'm deeply convinced about that. Because in fact, I always think of L1 acquisition, right? You say to a child, come. And the child, comes. Don't do this. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. Everything is always coupled. So I'm with you. Sure. There is also a lot of rehabilitation research on looking at people doing things, which is in line with what you say, right? So you've got mirror capacities, and so you simulate what they're doing, and then you might reactivate networks that have been damaged for whichever reasons.
Other questions?
Why does Paul Muller not suggest to use gestures? I didn't get that bit.
Well, I never talked with him about this, and because I met him several times, but there were other topics on the table. He says, well, his idea is, like in constraint-induced motor rehabilitation. So if this is mostly the half the body, the right part, if you got a stroke, language is lost, and the right part of the body, right? So, and if you can use your left hand, you will always use it. So this is what you tend to do, right? And this arm, well, if it doesn't work, you just don't use it. So what do they do in motor rehabilitation? They immobilize. Wow. Where does it come from? They immobilize, from Italian, the arm which is working, so you're obliged to use the other. So, which is, I think, it works, right? So there is evidence that it works. By avoiding, because aphasics, they don't use gestures really to communicate. I've had the experience, I don't know with you, because you're more in these things, I'm not. But I was a lot in clinics, in neurology clinics, so I observed that. And what they do is that they use always the same gesture when they try to communicate. So what's this? Woo, they go, woo. And what do you mean? It's a building, woo, woo, right? So for whichever reasons, they use a gesture. And Muller says, suppress it, so language will pop out. This is the reason he has, but on the other side, we cannot just ignore this connection, this very strong connection, because, for instance, mental imagery, right? It's so clear that the 2 things go together, right? house, this is house, this can be house, this can be house, but this cannot be house, right? So, I mean, there is a very strong connection which might be used also in rehabilitation. I think so.
Okay, so I think we end here, so that otherwise we are running out of time. Thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be more interesting questions. You can always email Manuela about it.
Yeah.
So, and I thank you again for.
Thank you for the invitation.